Does financial aid from the government promote poverty? That's a very good question that I think should be looked at without a political bias. Now, when I say financial aid, I think we all know what I mean. It's when you're below the poverty line, the federal poverty line, I'll put that up now, which is basically just for your household statistics. How much money are you making? And if you're not making enough, the federal government will classify you as below the poverty line. And if you are below the poverty line, then you are eligible for various amounts, some sort of amounts of financial aid. Now, this video is not political and talking about whether financial aid is good or bad, just whether it promotes poverty or not. So when I say, does financial aid promote poverty? Well, it's not like the government is taking money away from them. Actually, quite the opposite. They are giving money during financial aid. So how could this possibly promote poverty? Well, it kind of has to do with a little bit of psychology. I am by no means a psychologist, or actually I've never taken a psychology class in my life. Not really big into the brain, but I am sure there's some sort of psychological reasoning where if you were more comfortable, then you are less likely to do something. Now, what do I mean by this? Let's say you're below the poverty line. Most likely, you are going to live a more uncomfortable life than someone above the poverty line. Again, not saying this is good or bad, that's just most likely the case. Now, what financial aid does is the government, if you're below the poverty line, the government will give you money to make your life a little more comfortable, a little more easier. Live the American dream. Live the life that the government sees is suitable. That is what financial aid is. So when the government is giving you this money, they are making you more content in your situation. They are making you more comfortable being below the poverty line. Now, I'm not saying whether this is good or bad, again, not political, but when the government does this and you become comfortable, you become content under the poverty line, that is promoting poverty because your actions are now less. If you're comfortable and content under the poverty line, you might have some children because you're relying on that government money coming into you, and you don't think it's going to stop anytime soon, right? Like you're relying, not necessarily you're relying, but you're depending, and you think you know that the government money is going to keep on coming in. So again, if you're counting on this money from the government to keep coming in, and you know it's going to keep on coming in, you might make some different decisions, whereas if the money wasn't coming in, like if you wanted to start a family and you felt comfortable being below the poverty line and that the government was going to give you enough money to where you could have a family, then you would have a family below the poverty line. Not saying that's good or bad, but if that's something you want to do, you couldn't do that if the government wasn't giving you financial aid. So the government is making people content with being below the poverty line. Whereas if you weren't below the poverty line, then you might wait off and the government wasn't going to give financial aid and your situation was a little more uncomfortable because the government wasn't giving you money. You might wait off on a family, work on your professional career, try to build up a little bit of wealth, get above the poverty line, and then you would have a family and you would be above the poverty line and you want to be relying on that government money. All of this said and done, there's still the question, why would the government want people to be below the poverty line, right? Like, doesn't the government want more money in the economy and stuff like this? Well, this all comes back to the conspiracy theory. It all comes back to the age-old history lesson of why the wealthy elite class doesn't want the middle class. Why don't they? It's because it's competition. If everybody was in the middle class, then the middle class would be taking money away from the elite class. Whereas if you have the majority of your people in the poor, less fortunate class, well, they're not taking as much money away from the elite class, and the elite class has 90% of the wealth, or whatever that statistic is. And, well, then how is the government playing a part in this, you ask? Well, it's pretty simple. The government is in ties with the elitist of the elite ties. It all circles back. I guarantee you, the richest people in the world, they have ties with the government. The recent presidents, inauguration. Not political at all, just saying some of the richest people in the United States of America were there. So that's obviously invite only. So just saying there's obviously going to be ties between your wealthy aristocrats and the government, and it wouldn't be a far stretch of the imagination to say that they would have some sort of inconspicuous deal going about to keep the wealth and all that power to themselves, because they don't want the middle class having all of it. Obviously, more money, more money, more money. So that's pretty much the entirety of the conspiracy theory, but I also wanted to do a little bit of math just to, prove myself, because I don't think the math lies. Now, again, this is a little bit inaccurate as I am using the average U.S. income, which is going to be a little skewed from the poverty line income. Now, we'd look at the average U.S. income, and I'm just using the average because the math would be incredibly hard and incredibly tedious to do this for the poverty line, because there's so many different statistics that play a role. So the average U.S. income is $40,000. Now, if we divide that by 12, that's about $3,300 a month. Now, if we take that and subtract that from the monthly rent in the United States of America, that would be about $1,500, and then we subtract another $500 for monthly groceries, which is your necessities of life. You still have about $1,300 or so left over. And with this money left over, this still leaves car bills and stuff like that. So I know you're not going to have $1,000 left over each month. But this proves that a lot of people would have some money left over at the end of the month. And again, this video is not political, so I'm not saying federal funding is good or bad, but they have money left over at the end of the month. And if the U.S. government continues to give them more money, then they become more content with their monthly income, their monthly dividend, you might say. If that number at the end of the month is lower after you pay your bills and your food necessities and food stuff, then you're going to be looking at that number that you actually save, go spend, put in your bank account. If that number is lower, you're going to get a little more urgency, want to do a little more things, and you're going to work a little bit harder, I would assume. Now, if that number is a little bit higher, it's like, hey, good job, pat yourself on the back, go buy some ice cream for yourself, whatnot, because you did a good job this month. Got some extra bills, put it in the savings account, and all that stuff. Life is good. Might go home, open a few beers, but if that number's lower, you're going to want to do something about it. So I think this all just comes back to, what they say, a little bit of common sense, a little bit of psychology. Nobody's a psychology major, but you just got to think about it a little bit. And it would not be a far stretch of the imagination to say that the U.S. government uses financial aid to promote poverty in order for the wealthy aristocrat class to stay in power and keep all that power to themselves and keep the 90%, 99% of all wealth to the 1% of the owners. That's about it. Stay safe and stay hydrated.